This is always the funnest one. Well, my name is Jim Collison. I want to welcome you to the Heartland Developer Conference. We're kind of in the bonus content, or the bonus round of it. And I am here with Paul Oliver. Paul, thanks for coming out and being a part of it. Yeah,
right on.
Let's get to know you a little bit, who you are, where you're from, what you do, those kinds of things.
My name is Paul Oliver. I work as a lead developer at Farm Credit Services of America. I'm passionate about technology. I try to see what's happening, try to go get after it. One of the things that drives me is a team that's willing to change. Zero trauma. I'm all about zero trauma as the team moves from one thing to another thing.
Give me the definition of zero trauma. What does that mean?
Zero trauma is the concept that, hey, everything's changing, right? So we're going to, one thing we do know is everything will look different next year. And so the teams that will succeed are the teams that can be agile. They can switch when the time comes to switch from technology A to technology B.
Sure.
And we don't have a bunch of people just grumbling with their arms crossed across their chests and they're just saying, like, this is not going to work here. And so that would be a trauma change.
Okay.
Zero trauma means everybody says, all right, I buy in.
Sure.
I can see that we've thought about this and it makes sense. Let's see how it works. Let's experiment. If it fails, it fails.
Cool. Cool. And what did you say your role there at Farm Credit?
Lead developer. Okay. And so I have a team we have 10 developers, and we're building web front ends using AngularJS, and back end is using Microsoft ASP.NET.
Oh, very
stack.
cool.
And
we came to the right conference. There's been a ton of Angular.
Oh, yeah.
Discussion here, a lot of
Angular's huge right now,
especially at this conference. It was just, as I think every other session what was based on that. Let's talk a little bit about your session. Was that today or yesterday?
I had a session today, and it was on what's the big deal about Git. And so I know there's a lot of big shops that are wondering, should we move over to Git? Small shops, all the startups, they're all using Git.
Sure.
It's popular there, but can a big company like a Farm Credit, like a Gallup, like a Blue Cross, can they jump into Git, and what does that look like?
Right, and what makes it attractive for the startup but not for the enterprise?
The startup tends to come, and they don't have a legacy of a lot of code sitting there in source code with history, with comments going back 5 years, and people want to switch, but they don't want to lose that stuff.
For sure. And it's probably, even when you talk about the zero trauma, moving from the old system to the new, that causes trauma, right?
Absolutely.
So sometimes that's why they don't get done. So in your session, talk a little bit about, so did you give some you talked about using it in a legacy environment?
Yes. So Farm Credit, we switched from TFS version control, and we have years of history in there, and we switched to Git, and we talked about that briefly.
What was the business reason for that? Why did you do that?
We are trying to get to continuous delivery, and I'm sure most of your users or listeners know what that is, but continuous delivery is the concept of a developer checking in a feature, they finish the feature, tests run, and when the tests pass, that feature is free to go to production. And so you should, if you're doing your job right, you are publishing to production multiple times a day. And so continuous delivery is something we want to do at Farm Credit. And a great tool to enable that is Git, because it allows for that lightweight experimentation. It's not heavy on process. It gets out of your way and just lets you, get your job done.
And so it's a new way of, and I shouldn't say new, but it is a way of getting those iterations to go a little bit faster. So what kind of advice then did you give in your session? What did you talk through? What were the points?
My advice was to use Git for almost everything except for 2 instances. And the 2 instances are if you work with a lot of large binary files that change often. So if you're doing media, if you're doing reports, those sorts of things.
Not good for that.
This is where you can use some Git plugins to help with that, but not for the faint of heart, not for the Git newbie. The other situation is where you have to lock a file so that no one else edits it while you're in the code, while you're changing it. And so I challenge them. However, you recognize a lock on a file is just a communication tool. It's just you saying, hey, I got this file, leave it alone for a little bit. You can do that with an IM. You can do that with email. Just communicate with your team, and everything will be better anyway. And the problems with locks, like the guy that goes on vacation and leaves the files checked out for the weekend, or the guy you fired 3 years ago and he had 10 files checked out and you didn't know about it, this fixes that problem. Git doesn't have that problem.
All right. What kind of what kind of pushback do you get though when you? I mean, obviously people come up to you after you're done. And maybe this time, is this the first time you've given that presentation?
Given Git talks, this is probably the third time.
Okay.
Typical pushback tends to be somebody that had a bad experience with Git because they didn't quite understand how it worked. And it is a little different mindset, right? So it's almost like you and I went on vacation and we speak English, but we went to some backcountry New Zealand village, and they speak English, but it's a little different. Their slang is different, so we get the impression that we know what they're saying, but they could be telling us, hey, you know, we think they're telling us to go to that restaurant down the street and you'll have a great meal, but they're telling us to avoid it at all costs.
Right.
So with Git, it's so similar to the tools you used up until then. You use Subversion or TFS or CVS. The terms are very similar, but they mean something different. And so the new person usually gets burned when they treat them the same.
Yeah.
And so that's usually what happens is somebody will say, yeah, I had a bad experience. I lost my code because I didn't know what I was doing. So my goal is to encourage them to push through a little further, learn the real slang in the Git world, and then it will make a lot more sense.
Maybe a couple recommended steps if I'm in an organization, say I'm Gallup, and we're thinking about doing something like this.
Yeah.
What would you tell me, one or two things maybe to watch out for, to think about as we make this transition?
Number one thing is to start with your developers trained to a certain extent, right? You can't have 4 people trained and the other 10 people are supposed to pick it up on the fly. I would actually get them all in the room together, get them all on the same page, because the other 6 or the other 10 that aren't trained, they're going to have the problems, and they'll introduce problems for everyone else.
Yeah.
Because they're going to do things wrong.
Yeah.
The other thing
how long does it take? Can I ask real quick? How long does it take to get trained?
Oh, great question. So one of the things that I'm excited about doing when we moved our team to Git last November is I quizzed them. I basically said, before we moved to Git, how experienced with Git were you? Were you an expert? Were you intermediate? Were you no experience at all? And then I asked, how long did it take you to get comfortable with Git, where you could actually, if you wanted to do a goal of some sort, how long did it take you to get there? And it was awesome. They all had about similar answers. So of 8 developers, 1 was an expert, 2 were intermediate, and the rest had no experience at all. And then the average time to comfort was 1 to 2 weeks. So I would say 2 weeks would be the benchmark in your mind to get everybody trained. And then I also asked, which was the best question of all, was would you go back to the old source control tool that we used, having found out and learned about Git? And this was 3 months later. And some of them had only had 1 month of Git, and all of them said, no, I don't want to go back. And what's really fascinating is the 1-monther, he actually came to us from Microsoft. He was an employee of Microsoft in Redmond, and TFS is, Microsoft's technology. He really liked using that tool, but he was seeing that the superiority of Git was there, and he didn't want to go back to it. So it's 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And the training is all. I mean, teams can do it. There's a lot of free training out there for the manager out there that doesn't have that budget to get his team in a room. There's some great tools out there.
I bet there are.
Yeah.
Just out there, YouTube. I'm sure there's
YouTube.
People
There's a great one out there, and the URL is, I'll say it. It's pcoddle.github.io/learn-git-branching. pcoddle.github.io/learn-git-branching. Capital G, capital B.
I'll try and get that from you again and put it in the notes right below this video when folks are done. Yeah.
So this is an interactive training tool. It has animated. It animates what Git's doing as you type in these commands or as you execute these Git commands, and shows you exactly what's happening. And then the best part is the challenges. So it'll actually create a goal, and it'll say, make your Git tree look like this, and you have to type in the commands so that it works. And what's great is we get my entire team in a room, and we take turns sitting in the hot seat, taking that challenge, and we're encouraging that teammate, and we're making sure, hey, make sure you do a commit right here. We help them along, and when they commit it, we got to cheer them on because they did a great job. But what happens is the team leaves the room, they are excited, they're energized, they want to go use Git to its full potential, and it really takes you from a beginner to intermediate to a advanced user in just a few sessions. I think it took us 2 sessions, about an hour and a half each, and my team night and day difference. They were the Git evangelists across the floor after those 2 sessions.
Sure. Most of the people that come to your session already know about this and are using it and looking for validation, or are they?
Most are new.
They are new.
So
okay.
I asked the audience how many are using Git, and I'd say maybe 10 to 15% of the hands went up. And so people that know Git, they usually stay away. It's going to be boring. Even though my talks are so entertaining, I teach you how to beatbox. I teach you how to become a human beatbox in your session, just because if nothing else, you can beatbox when you're driving home.
It's a good skill to have. You never know when you're going to need to break out a beatbox jam.
Yeah.
I sometimes go,
That's a good one, and that's a solid start into the beatboxing world.
It's worth doing.
Yeah.
Hey, as you get to the end of this, we only gave you 45 minutes in the sessions. Mm-hmm. If you had 15 more minutes, what would you say in the 15 minutes that you have left? Yeah.
If I had some more time, here's the bonus content.
Yeah.
First thing to look out for as your team moves to Git is to understand how line endings in Git work. And so you need to understand that when you're in a Windows box, you want to check out your files in Windows mode and check them in Unix mode. Why? Because we're sharing our code. It's becoming a flat world. We're sharing our code out there, and eventually you might want to upload one of your libraries to GitHub or to Visual Studio Online and share it out. And so other people that want to use your tool or contribute patches, if you don't do, if you don't check out Windows style, check in Unix style, they're going to have a lot of troubles when they submit patches. So you're going to get a wall of pink, and your file merges will look horrible because their line endings will be just a carriage return, and yours will be carriage return line feed, and your mergers are going to be atrocious. The other thing I want to talk about is just learn how you undo things in Git. You have a lot of tools at your disposal, and I would say this: if you are checking, undoing something locally that you haven't pushed up to everybody else, do a reset. If you are undoing something that you already shared out with the rest of the world, do a revert. So understand the difference between reset and revert.
It's been a long day.
Get my guitar out and put on the reverb. But to understand the difference between the two, and you will become so effective with Git because you already know how to undo any problems that you create with those two tips.
Good tips.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good tips. Is the future of source code in the cloud?
Yeah, I will say yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, are we going to make it there someday? And it's not today. That day is not today.
The cloud, with the scalability and with having the ability to kick off builds, deploy to the cloud, scale up when you need it if demand grows, it's so liberating, so freeing to know that I don't have to set in and do a requisition request for a month in advance to get an extra server. All I have to do is move a slider, right? And so when the demand goes high and peaks, you just meet that needs. It's more expensive to do that, but it's worth the cost if you don't want to deal with all that nonsense of maintenance.
Right. This may be a harder question. Is the future of development in the cloud? As a developer, in other words, you probably develop on your desktop, right? And we have big, powerful desktops for. Are we ever going to make those images to the cloud so we're not dependent on?
I think so. I think the desktop application is going the way of the buffalo, and now it's all going to be web apps for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And web,
maybe not for a while.
And cloud.
Desktop utilization in the cloud can still be a little rough.
Yeah. So there's always going to be those apps that are CPU hungry and require a GPU to do that stuff, and that's going to be a desktop app.
We'll have to fix some of that. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. But
absolutely, great question.
With the devs, I manage a bunch of them, and we talk about this all the time. And we're trying to get efficient, and get cost effective, and yet they're still very local centric in a lot of ways, and need to be for the right reasons. And so. It's just when we've really made, on the server side, we've really made these big jumps to the cloud, but there's just still a lot of things that need to be done locally, and I think we'll get there too, but I'm always interested in a developer's opinion on how that is going. Best part of the conference for me, and then we'll wrap it up. What do you think is the best thing that you saw here?
I really enjoyed John Wert's talk on getting to know your customers, and so he said don't create that little cardboard cutout and just say, this is our user, and so let's design for this user, because that user doesn't actually exist. It's usually so broadly defined, and you can't actually ask that cardboard cutout or that piece of paper, hey, should I make the button blue or green? You can't do that.
Right.
So his concept was go out there to have your dev team fly them somewhere if you have to.
Yeah.
Get them around there and interview and ask the 5 whys.
Yeah.
Get to the bottom of what they really want, and
Right.
that's when you'll truly know what you should be building.
No. Good advice. Good advice. Paul, thanks for taking a few minutes to interview. Good to have you here, local, in-town, strengths guy here with Gallup as well. We were talking about strengths just before we got started, but thanks for coming out. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. You bet. Hang tight for 1 second.